So to put the TPP in perspective, and what this is really about, it helps to go back a little bit in history. So I'm going to take us back for a moment to 1933, when the corporate oligarchs of this country decided that they didn't have enough oligarchical power, that when the big corporations and the ruling elites were unhappy with President Roosevelt, and decided that they wanted to cut out the middleman and wanted to run the country directly. So they went to a guy by the name of Smedley Darlington Butler, the most decorated military man in the country at the time, and they made him an offer. They told him they wanted him to be their guy to knock out Roosevelt and put them in charge of the country directly. Well, fortunately for all of us, Smedley Darlington Butler was a patriot, was not willing to overthrow his government, and went to Congress and to the administration, told them about this plot. It was investigated. Congress found it to be not just a crazy conspiracy, but a credible rumor, or credible conspiracy. No charges were pressed, but it in fact emboldened, some say, President Roosevelt to move ahead with the New Deal, and the corporate media, for their part, dismissed it as crazy nonsense and tried to discredit Smedley Butler, because they thought we know who they were working for. History repeats itself, as we'll see later on in that regard. So the corporations after that decided that they needed to use more of a Trojan horse to take over the country. And so they start, as these things often do, they started doing it in pieces. So after World War II, administration started pushing a thing called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And this was one of the innovations of the Bretton Woods Conference. It was supposed to, the idea was to create a global trade agreement that would eventually lead to the creation of a global trade organization, an international trade organization. And but one of the innovations herein was that this was not just going to be about what trade agreements were normally about. You know, we lower our tariff on your wine, and you lower your tariff on our wheat. This was going to deal with things that were not normally part of trade agreements. The so-called non-tariff issues, non-tariff barriers to trade. Well, what is that? That's a nice term. That means our domestic legislation, the things that might block a product from being imported because it's against our laws, things like our food safety laws, our environmental protection laws, our labor protection laws. Well, Congress started recognizing that what was happening here was an attempt to circumvent the legislature. So while Congress reluctantly delegated to the president power to deal with the actual trade aspects of this GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, they held off on committing to all these other little pieces. Well, that went along until the 70s, when our old friend Tricky Dick introduced a thing called fast track. And he tried to sell this to labor at first, saying, hey, these non-tariff barriers was really blocking your exports. Labor at the time was actually trying to push for some very progressive legislation that would have raised global labor standards, would have actually put concrete requirements on imports, bringing them up to a higher level, actually using trade as a tool to advance economic rights and social justice and labor rights, instead of doing the opposite. So President Nixon said, no, this non-tariff thing is where we need to go. And for a short while, labor almost believed him, but very soon they realized that it was a double cross. So labor came out against this fast track thing. Unfortunately, Congress passed it, and now we had a way of doing trade that said that the president could negotiate trade agreements, didn't have to go to Congress first to get permission as to who they were supposed to negotiate with, could pretty much write the executive branch could pretty much write the whole damn thing themselves, throw in all sorts of things that had nothing to do with trade, and then bring it back to Congress like this. Hey, Congress, here's this piece of legislation. You have 90 days to vote on it. At the end of 90 days, you can vote it up, you can vote it down. You can't hold it up in committee. You only have 20 hours to have hearings on it. You can't amend a damn thing. No period, no comma can be changed. And at the end of that, you have to have a vote, which means that for 90 days, everyone in Congress is hearing from every corporate lobbyist you can imagine. Meanwhile, they haven't even had a chance to look at this thing. I mean, you need a team of lawyers and economists to even understand what these things are about. And they have 90 days basically to do anything with it, to deliberate and try to make heads or tails of the things. So basically it's designed as a ramrod. So using that method, President Reagan decided that these trade agreements would be a great backdoor to get through all kinds of pieces of his anti-regulatory agenda. And then in the early 90s, we see the rise of NAFTA. And NAFTA made a bad thing worse. With NAFTA, they brought in this idea of investor-state dispute resolution. And what this meant was that we were now giving foreign corporations more power than our own government. Under investor-state, a foreign company could sue our government when our domestic public interest laws interfered with their profits, their future profits. So a company could say one of our public interest laws is preventing them from all the money they might make in the future. So they can now sue us for all the money they think they might have made. It's basically a way for corporations to supersede democracy and basically extort money out of our government. So obviously this is a great thing for the corporations, and both George H.W. and Bill Clinton were all too happy to oblige. And so once they had this in place with NAFTA, they tried to expand it. They wanted this kind of corporate rule trade agreement globally. And so in Seattle in 1999, they had a big meeting of the World Trade Organization, which was the metastasized form of GATT. GATT turned into a malignant tumor. The International Trade Organization they really wanted, where they were going to take what they'd already started with the WTO in '95 and make it even worse. Well, thankfully, some of us got wind of that, some of the people's movements of this country and the world, and probably in an unprecedented way, at least in this country's history, labor united in the streets with environmentalists, anti-hunger activists, with AIDS activists, anarchists, with liberals, pretty much just about everyone who saw that the corporations were making a massive power grab to just put themselves in charge in the same way that they did in 1933, and realized that we had to all get together to stop them. Well, we did stop the expansion of the WTO in Seattle. And then again, the Clinton administration, Bush administration, tried to kind of do the same thing, a smaller piece. They had a thing called the Free Trade Area of the Americas, to basically put a free trade agreement to make it absolutely clear that the U.S. was going to run this hemisphere on behalf of its corporations, goddammit, as it had been doing for pretty much already the last 200 years, but let's make it official. Well, that fell apart too because of massive resistance throughout the Americas. They then tried to go ahead with some smaller trade agreements, a country here, a country there, and passed a trade agreement with Colombia, Panama, Peru, Singapore, a very large trade agreement with South Korea, which has already led to significant U.S. job losses, even though it's only been in effect for 2 years. So President Obama, in 2008, campaigned vigorously on the idea that he was the one candidate who was against NAFTA. He sent out mailers against Hillary Clinton with shuttered factory gates, linking Hillary Clinton to the Clinton administration's NAFTA policy. Well, it leaked that while he was doing that, he had an advisor up in Canada telling the Canadian government that this was all just campaign rhetoric, and that actually leaked during the primaries. As soon as the primary was over, he pretty much came out and said that flat out. So then when he was elected, he started singing a very different tune than all that nice rhetoric on NAFTA. So in 2011, he passed 3 trade agreements that George Bush II had left on the table. Hadn't been able to get through Congress. Obama could do it. So we ended up with these trade agreements with Panama, South Korea, and Colombia. And then, now for the last 5 years, emboldened by that victory, they've been negotiating something even bigger and badder, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This is a trade agreement with 40% of the global economy. It includes Japan, Singapore, Canada, US, Chile, Peru, Australia, Mexico, New Zealand, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, I'm probably moving this way. And it is pretty much everything that we've seen about these past trade agreements made worse. The negotiations for this are currently underway and being conducted in secret. You can't see the negotiating text, I can't see the negotiating text. After raising a big stink, members of Congress have on a very limited basis been able to see the text. They can go into a room, they can't take notes, staff has extremely limited access, and this is straight from Alan Grayson. You're not allowed to tell anyone what you see, you're sworn to secrecy, they're treated as classified documents. Meanwhile, who does get to see these? 600 corporate advisors who are considered official trade advisors to the negotiating process can see the text at the click of a button on their computer, get USTR on the phone, and say, this is what we want, guys, take notes. Who is the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative? According to Alan Grayson, these are basically corporate hacks, people who either come out of big corporations and went into government jobs to keep doing the bidding of their bosses, or people who want to leave government jobs to go into jobs with big corporations to screw over the working class. So who they really work for is not you and me. Who they really work for is the U.S. Business Coalition for TPP. The U.S. Business Coalition is a coalition of pretty much every corporation you could ever hate. From the worst polluters to the big box retailers who want to import sweatshop goods, from the oil companies to Halliburton, pretty much everyone you've ever attended a picket against is part of this business coalition. And so some of the things that they want out of this thing, companies like Pfizer want to see extended intellectual property, extended patent terms on drugs. They want to see They want it so that they can keep generic drugs off the market. It's a death sentence for people with AIDS in developing countries. It means that seniors in this country are going to have a harder time, or our country's going to have a harder time ensuring the drug benefits of seniors. They don't care. They care about their profits. For the internet companies, they want to criminalize our use of the internet. You make a YouTube video out of some different files you find, you can get in trouble for it. Your internet service provider is going to be basically required to spy on your internet use and police your internet use. The big banks want to lock in rules against deregulation. We already bailed them out of one financial collapse, so what's another? So exactly the kind of rules that we put in place to prevent a financial collapse, they want to build into rules into TPP that make those kind of rules illegal. So the good news is that fast track, what Lori Wallach from Public Citizens Global Trade Watch usually describes as a legislative laxative that attacks our Constitution, expired in expired in 2007. And in order for President Obama to be able to use this to ramrod this thing through Congress, it has to be reauthorized. In January, Congress tried to do, or some people in Congress tried to do just that. Max Baucus, en route to, as his parting gift before going over to China to be our ambassador and preside over the development sweatshop economy on behalf of Walmart, created this bill, the Bipartisan Trade Priorities Act of 2014. Pretty much every word of that was a lie, except for 2014, and maybe it wasn't bipartisan. He was a Democrat, and they had Dave Camp, the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, sponsor it in the House, who was Republican. So in that sense, it was bipartisan. But it was so unbipartisan that they could not find a single Democrat to co-sponsor in the House, even though John Boehner said flat out that he wouldn't touch this thing if they couldn't get a certain number of Democrats co-sponsoring it. So that thing went over like a lead balloon. So what they're trying to do now, you know what they do with these things. When they can't tell you what they're really doing, they do the same thing and they call it something else. So now Ron Wyden, the new Finance Committee chair who took over for Max Baucus, says that, yeah, that bill wasn't such a good idea. We're going to do it again, but we're going to call it Smart Track now. We'll make it a little more transparent. We'll tell you a little better how we're going to screw you, but you're still screwed. So obviously, we don't want this either. This is a terrible idea. And they're talking. There's actually been some talk recently that in the last few days that they may introduce this pretty soon. But what we're really worried about is that they're going to do what they always do with these kind of terrible bills, which is move them in November right after the election when no one's paying attention, when everyone thinks the political season is over, everyone's getting ready for Thanksgiving, and they can just slip through all the crap that they don't want us to know about. So that's what we're gearing up for right now. So what can we do about this? Well, there's a couple things we can do. One of them is we can, with an election coming up in this district, we have a great opportunity to move both candidates. I just saw a paper before, very exciting commitments from Michael Grimm. Michael Grimm actually, to his credit, has already spoken out against fast track. That's great news because he actually in the past has voted for some of these bad trade agreements, but it seems like he's seen the light or seen that he needs to stay on the good side of the union movement. So hey, whatever works, great that he's doing it. We need to make sure that every candidate in this race takes that position. No TPP, no fast track. There's also a great opportunity in the Senate. Alan Grayson, who I've mentioned a couple times in this talk, just moved an amendment through the House, a rider to an appropriations bill that will defund any funding for negotiations of a trade agreement that will attach a language that prevents Buy American legislation, meaning legislation that actually says, hey, U.S. government, when we're buying stuff, we should actually buy from U.S. stuff being made by U.S. workers. They've been trying to eliminate things like that through TPP. They want to get rid of these kind of government preferences, government procurement rules. So Alan Grayson just basically said that they do that, they're going to lose funding to make this thing possible. We need to tell the Senate they need to do the exact same thing. So we need to put calls into Schumer and Gillibrand and tell them that they need to protect our right to decide what our government buys. We need to write letters and op-eds to the papers, get some articles in the advance. Organize events like this. Build coalitions of groups who don't want to see this kind of thing happen. Talk to liberals and conservatives alike. This is an attack on our Constitution. This is something that there's reasons people across the spectrum should be concerned about. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that Congress, not the President, is supposed to decide what goes into our trade agreement. So fast track is really an attack on the Constitution. Look, the good news is we did defeat WTO expansion. We did defeat FTA, and we have to defeat TPP, because there are other things waiting in the wings after this. They're already working on a trade agreement with Europe called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. There's a trade and services agreement that they're going to use to try to outsource the entire service sector. So we have a big fight on our hands. But if they can get through TPP, you know they're going to go like gangbusters trying to get through the rest of them. But we've won before. We can win again. And if we work together, we can.